Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us so bright and early. I'm pleased to welcome you to the fifth colloquium on race, equity, and social justice for this academic year. And I'm Bonnie Thornton-Dill, Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities and professor in the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. As those of you, I see some regulars here and some others who are joining us for the first time, but we launched this series in 2020 as part of our college's broader initiative on race, equity, and social justice, which has been developed around the goal of understanding and dismantling structural racism. The broader initiative includes transforming curriculum, reducing discrimination in teaching, research, and service, and expanding the impact of the college's longstanding and continuing scholarship on racism, anti-racism, equity, and justice. And then consistent with President Pines' focus on racial justice and identity, we are pleased to welcome students who are participating as part of the Terrapin Strong onboarding program. In our view, part of our approach to this program is to offer opportunities for students to be exposed to the many different ways faculty in the college study and teach about race, equity, and justice. Throughout this year and last, I invited faculty experts from across RHU to discuss their scholarship and creative projects related to anti-racism and social justice. And this year, we have continued these conversations with ongoing discussions of the impacts of systemic racism on Blacks and also on Asian, Jewish, LGBTQ+, Arab, and Muslim populations in the US. The format for each session includes a brief presentation, followed by a conversation with me, and then an opportunity for you to ask questions. I'll request that you keep your microphones on mute during the presentation, but during the last 15 minutes or so of our time together, you will be invited to join the conversation. So please begin thinking of questions and jotting down your notes as you listen to our speaker. You may place these questions in the chat and send them directly to Associate Dean Patrick Warfield, who will be moderating the Q&A. Or when the time comes, use Zoom's raise hand feature, whatever works best. Also, please note this event is being recorded for future viewing on the RHU website. So today's session features Dr. Sahar Khamis, Associate Professor in RHU's Department of Communication. Dr. Khamis is a leading expert on Arab and Muslim media, and this expertise has allowed her to take on a variety of scholarly and public roles. She is the co-author of 2 books, Islam.com, Contemporary Islamic Discourses in Cyberspace, and Egyptian Revolution 2.0, Political Blogging, Civic Engagement, and Citizen Journalism. Most recently, she is co-editor of Arab Women's Activism and Socio-Political Transformation, Unfinished Gender Revolutions. Her many book chapters, journal articles, and conference papers that have appeared in both English and Arabic. And in addition to her 15 years as a faculty member here at Maryland, she was head of the Mass Communication and Information Science Department at Qatar University, and recently a Mellon Islamic Studies Initiative visiting professor at the University of Chicago. Professor Khamis is a public intellectual, serving as a media analyst and public speaker, as a commissioner of the Montgomery County Human Rights Commission, and hosting a monthly radio show on US Arab Radio, which is the first Arab American radio station broadcasting in the US and Canada. Her work on addressing threats to international journalists resulted in her 2019 recognition with the University of Maryland Research Communicator Award. So today, Professor Khamis will guide us through some of her recent work, which has sought to help us understand how Islamophobia has been countered through research, activism, and media outreach. So please join me now in welcoming Professor Sahar Khamis.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much to our fearless leader, Dean Bonnie, for putting together this wonderful and excellent and timely series on race, equity, and social justice. I am most honored to be one of the participants in this important and timely series, and thanks so much to the organizing team and everyone who worked with Dean Bonnie, and also for all the attendees who took time today to join this conversation. So I'll start with sharing my screen here. And let's see. All right. So I'm going to talk today, as Dean Bonnie just mentioned, on insights on countering Islamophobia through research, activism, and media outreach. I want to start first as an ethnographic qualitative researcher with a note on self-reflexivity. As an Arab American and Muslim American scholar of communication and women's studies, whose research focuses on the dynamics of Arab and Muslim media, the topic of today's discussion is of special importance and relevance to me, both personally and professionally. I've been living in the US for the last 14 years, and I've been witnessing and sometimes experiencing firsthand the rising wave of Islamophobia with all its different dire consequences. So Islamophobia is a new name for an old problem, the idea of fearing a certain group of people because they're different culturally, racially, or religiously is not a new phenomenon. It's been there for centuries, and we call this phenomena stereotyping. Therefore, it could be said that Islamophobia, which is characterized by an exaggerated sense of dislike and hostility towards Islam and Muslims, is a new name for an old problem. There are different definitions of Islamophobia. Could be commonly defined as an exaggerated fear, hatred, and hostility towards Islam and Muslims that is perpetuated by negative stereotypes resulting in bias, discrimination, and the marginalization and exclusion of Muslims from social, political, and civic life. Also, some scholars described it as a form of visible backlash against Muslims across Europe and the US. And the word backlash encompasses different forms of harm, not just bodily harm, but can also include mental, psychological harm as well. Other definitions also looked at the type of fear, irrational fear of losing life or liberty to Islamic rule. And when we talk about this particular dimension, we have to think about certain terms that get circulated in Western media, many times in skewed, uninformed, and distorted ways, such as the terms jihad or Sharia, which are not explained to the audience in a proper way and are completely taken out of context. There are different causes of Islamophobia: ignorance and lack of proper awareness about Islam as a faith and Muslims as people. People are always fearful of whatever they're ignorant about. There is also overgeneralization and stereotyping through using the actions of a few extremists to paint a dark and broad picture about 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide. There is also the fear of immigrants under the claim that there isn't enough space for them, or they're going to take other people's places and other people's jobs, or under certain framing them as a threat to national security, for example, which resulted in discriminatory policies like the Muslim Travel Ban 1 and Muslim Travel Ban 2. So the right-wing discourse, which emphasizes that Western civilization, for example, and Islam cannot coexist, has used certain terms like clash of civilizations or the West versus the rest. And that has perpetuated and escalated the whole problem of Islamophobia. So you see here some examples: no to Islam, Islam is the new Nazism, stop the invasion, stop the mosque. These are just some of the horrible types of discourses or slogans used in some of these rallies and protests and demonstrations. And of course, there's also some research, like for example, a Gallup poll in 2018 has shown that many Muslims report that they do not feel respected enough in the West. There are also research on some of the American and Canadian views. 52% of Americans in this particular survey said that the West does not represent or respect Muslim societies in a positive way or in a good way. And also 48% of Canadians said the same thing. So there are different 4 waves of Islamophobia in America. The first wave was the Iran hostage crisis. The second one emerged with the September 11th attacks. The third one escalated during the 2016 presidential campaign, and we all know the kind of rhetoric that was used at that time and resulted in policies like the Muslim travel ban. And really, the media at that time played a very important role, as we're going to talk about it in a minute, in terms of escalating this wave of Islamophobia. And the fourth wave came in 2021 with the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and the Afghanistan crisis. So the mainstream Western media and Islamophobia, the mainstream Western media has unfortunately played a very important role in terms of escalating the process or the phenomena of Islamophobia. According to ISPU, Institute of Social Policy and Understanding Research, for example, although 96% of terrorist attacks on US soil are committed by non-Muslims, mostly by right-wing white supremacists. In many cases, when the suspect has an Arab name or a Muslim name, the media coverage of this particular incident multiplies sometimes by hundreds of times over. The wide outreach of the media makes it easy for them to escalate this kind of phenomena through immediate instant messaging and transmission of this kind of content. And of course, this contributes to the problem of Islamophobia, which really translates into attacks on mosques, Islamic centers, on women wearing the hijab, the Muslim headscarf like myself. And that has been detected. There's been an increase, according to a Pew survey, in this type of Islamophobia by 67% in the US after the election of former President Donald Trump. So there's also the problem in the media, which is called when it bleeds, it leads. Meaning when you have a conflict, when you have a crisis, when you have a war, when you have some kind of bloodshed, that makes the headlines in the front pages and makes the headlines in the news, unfortunately. So the golden triangle for countering Islamophobia, in my opinion, includes three important dimensions: research, activism, and media outreach. So in terms of research, the surge in Islamophobia triggered a new line of academic research and a whole new body of literature, which specifically focuses on analyzing the phenomena of Islamophobia and unpacking its different complexities, manifestations, and implications. For example, there's the Journal of Islamophobia Studies, the Annual Conference of Islamophobia Studies Research, also new centers for Islamic studies, Muslim studies, Arabic studies, and Middle Eastern studies, many of which have been started in many different universities in the US and in the West in general. New faculty hires in these different areas. In fact, myself included, I was hired in 2007 at the University of Maryland under one of these searches for somebody whose expertise is the area of Middle Eastern media. So the waves of Islamophobia in the US served as a double-edged sword for American Muslims. On one hand, they increased bias, prejudice, discrimination, and hate crimes against Muslims. But on the other hand, however, they also increased interest in learning more about Islam and Muslims, and also at the same time increased solidarity with Muslims, which is a very important point. And that's where the activism part comes in, especially interfaith solidarity and activism. For example, marching out and marching together with Muslims to fight these discriminatory policies such as the Muslim travel ban. And each group then realized that justice is not just for us. We have to think about justice collectively as a holistic phenomenon. So that is the part about activism. As for the media outreach, there is still a remarkable underrepresentation of Muslims in mainstream Western media in terms of media portrayal, as well as in the professional field of media. However, there is a gradual shift in the right direction. Some parents are now encouraging their children to study communication, journalism, and film studies rather than only medicine and engineering. And also there is a slow but persistent increase in Muslim journalists and broadcasters in Western media. We're seeing now, Ali Vaichali and, for example, Ayman Muhyiddin and MSNBC, but of course we need many more. Also owning the narrative, realizing that if you don't tell your story in your own voice, it will not be accurately told. So basically the idea of owning the narrative and telling the story in their own voice is starting to be recognized as an important aspect by American Muslims and Muslims in the West in general. The double-edged sword of the internet with all its capacities, unfiltered content, borderless nature, can really serve as double-edged sword. On one hand, it can give a platform for certain Islamophobic groups to spread their own Islamophobia with Twitter campaigns such as #BanIslam, which focuses on Islamic extremism, talks about, oh, these Muslims are going to be a threat to the West and so on. But at the same time, the internet also provides unique opportunities for Muslims to respond to many of these Islamophobic campaigns and to start their own countering Islamophobia campaigns in cyberspace, as we're going to see in a second. So some of the successful campaigns that have been started online, for example, One of them is campaigns talking about, for example, how to dispel some of the myths around Islam and Muslims. Some scholars, including myself, use the term e-jihad, or electronic digital struggle online, by which or through which Muslims are trying to push back against the Islamophobic narrative and to dispel the myth and the stereotypes about themselves. Unity Production Foundation, for example, put together a very nice YouTube video. I'd love for you to watch it, which is called American Muslims Facts versus Fiction. And in this particular video, they try to dispel some of the misconceptions and myths about American Muslims, such as, oh, they're newcomers in the US. Well, they're not. They've been among the first founders of the US, the first people to come to the United States. Many of them have been Muslims. They're all radicalized extremists. This is, again, something which is very distorting and very negative, of course. Or they're all Arabs. The first thing I tell my students in my course on Arab media, not all Arabs are Muslims and not all Muslims are Arabs. So also there is the release of hashtag #WhyIslam and hashtag Discover Muhammad campaigns, which relied on a combination of both online websites and billboard ads on the street. So here are some examples. Looking for the answer, discover Muhammad. Jesus is a prophet of Islam, which is a fact that not very many people know about, but Muslims do believe, of course, in Jesus and in Virgin Mary. Who is Muhammad? Have questions, you got questions, get answers. All of these are combining online websites with billboards on the street, which is a strategy to reach the largest possible number of people. Also, Muslim users came up with the hashtag Muslim Rage to counter the anti-Muslim campaign known as hashtag Ban Islam. The name here is quite interesting. It's very sarcastic because you think Muslim Rage, oh my God, they're going to be angry. Really, what they used here was very witty and very successful humor. So they use things like, for example, if you are a Muslim and you see your friend Jack on the plane, don't you dare to shout, "Hi, Jack," because you can really get in trouble. So they try to use humor and a funny, approach to, kind of really tackle this whole problem of Islamophobia online. Also, there have been other successful campaigns, such as the campaign hashtag Can You Hear Us Now, which was a campaign by American Muslim women who took to Twitter in order to fight the narrative by former President Donald Trump when he profiled, or he was still a candidate at that time, profiled Miss Ghazala Khan, the wife of Mr. Khizr Khan. She was participating in the Democratic National Convention at the time, and he said, "Oh, look at his wife. She was standing there silent and quiet. Maybe she was not allowed to speak." So Muslim women took to Twitter with this hashtag Can You Hear Us Now campaign to amplify their voices and to dismantle and to fight the misconception of Muslim women being quote unquote silent or silenced. Another also example of a successful Twitter campaign was hashtag Muslims Report Stuff. Again, candidate Trump at the time when he was asked, "What are you going to do about Islamophobia?" He said, "Oh, you Muslims have a responsibility. When you see something, you have to report it right away." Of course, that kind of plays into the whole narrative of like, oh my God, these Muslims are doing suspicious stuff. So Muslims took to Twitter and started this hashtag Muslims Report Stuff. Like, for example, my mom cooks the same soup every day, so I'm reporting her to the authorities, hashtag Muslims Report Stuff. Or my brother does not tidy up his room, I'm going to report him to the FBI, hashtag Muslims Report Stuff. So he tried to be very, very funny and humorous, using a hilarious and witty and brilliant approach, using humor to kind of push back against Islamophobia online. Another effective campaign was launched by CARE, Council for American Islamic Relations, which was called the Islamophobian Pill. Basically, it just played this whole idea of like having a box that looked like ibuprofen, but instead it said Islamophobia. And it said, if you're experiencing any symptoms of Islamophobia, please take this pill 3 times a day after breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if the symptoms persist, maybe you can visit your local mosque or start to make friendship with your Muslim neighbors. So again, using some kind of funny and humorous approach. There's the hashtag Muslims are speaking out, which was a campaign on social media trying to show different Muslims holding a banner that says, "We are Muslims and we are speaking out against violence and terrorism and extremism in any form." And that is to push back against the idea of like, oh, why aren't Muslims speaking out against terrorism? Well, guess what? They are speaking out, but they are not heard. And that is a problem, that when you have rallies, for example, demonstrations, you have imams who are pushing back and saying, terrorism, extremism does not represent Islam. They get very, very minimal, very, very limited media coverage, unfortunately. So the goals and objectives of these campaigns was to really combat the whole negative and distorted media stereotypes and misrepresentations about Islam and Muslims, and to fight the sweeping generalizations about Islam and Muslims through kind of resisting the view that there is only one monolithic Muslim identity, culture, or lifestyle, which is of course not true because you have 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide, to promote better understanding and genuine awareness about Islam and Muslims, to resist the gender profiling of Muslim women as silent, oppressed, weak, vulnerable, all of that, and fight what we can call the quote unquote save the Muslim woman syndrome. Like women are so weak and vulnerable, they need to be saved. I always say no, they need to be heard and they need to be understood. To also highlight the similarities and overlaps rather than the differences and the distinctions between Muslims and non-Muslims. I always say whatever brings us together or unites us together is much, much greater than whatever divides us. So that's another very important point. So the right and wrong approaches to addressing the issue of Islamophobia: being proactive is always better than being reactive. Being the fire preventer is better than being the firefighter. This means spreading awareness and correct knowledge rather than just waiting for a crisis to happen and then being on the defensive. Also being open and frank about the problem of extremism and condemning terrorism without being excessively apologetic or overly ashamed, as if every Muslim is responsible for any act of terrorism that happens anywhere. That is, of course, a very negative attitude. Avoiding violence, aggression, and offensive language and actions when trying to address the issue of Islamophobia, because that plays into the hands of Islamophobes. We cannot fight darkness with darkness, to use MLK's final, very famous quote. It is also not possible to defend Islam against accusations of violence by being violent, or to defend the Prophet of Islam by going against his own teaching. So this is very important because it's going to create some kind of counter effect, or it's going to backfire and play into the hands of Islamophobes. Using humor really proved to be a very successful and very effective strategy, because one can say things through humor which cannot be said otherwise. When you are dealing with a sensitive and difficult issue like racism, sexism, Islamophobia, when you're putting it in a joke using humor, it becomes a much more effective tool. So a final word: an important point to bear in mind is that we cannot understand the phenomena of Islamophobia as detached or separate from other interrelated ongoing phenomena such as xenophobia, racism, white supremacy, sexism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of discrimination, prejudice, and hatred, which have been on the rise recently. Having a broader outlook on this important issue enables us to contextualize it within the broader framework of multiple forms of injustice, and therefore facilitates coming up with innovative strategies to combat these ongoing multiple challenges collectively and holistically in a well-coordinated fashion. At the end of the day, we are all in this together. Thank you so much, and I'm ready for your questions or comments.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And so I wanted to ask you just a couple of questions to start off. And you began your talk with kind of a self-reflexive moment. So I want to kind of go back there a little bit and ask you what drew you to beginning the work on women, Islam, and media, or digital media, or social media. What drew you into that? Were there particular issues that drew you? Just curious to know, or experiences.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you so much. I'll just start backtrack a little bit. Before the Arab Spring erupted in 2011, I was doing research, ethnographic research, qualitative research, mainly concerned about, for example, Arab women and Egyptian women's experiences with the media, how they perceive certain messages, how they consume the media, certain campaigns like family planning, literacy, health awareness. And then the very, very important moment of the Arab Spring happened in 2011. And we can say that that was a very important turning moment and shifting moment in terms of my own research agenda. So I started to really kind of shift my focus and my attention at that particular moment on the notions of cyber activism in general, which is the use of social media and new media to induce or promote change using new tools and digital tools and online tools, as well as cyber feminism in particular, which is how women in particular are using social media and new media to address their own issues of, gender discrimination and discrepancies in terms of gender rights and all of these issues. So that was a very important turning moment for me, and it really impacted my research agenda hugely. That was very important. And also another thing that really was a very important moment was the COVID-19 pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic also kind of inspired my own research agenda. I'm doing a lot of work and a lot of research on issues like, for example, how the Arab American and Muslim American community are contributing to promoting social justice and helping others, not just members of their own community, but also helping others through philanthropy and through giving and sharing and creating communities of charity and giving to others. So that is also another line of research which I'm very much interested in. And of course, the research on Islamophobia, as I mentioned in my presentation, is very much something that I'm very interested in. As a Muslim woman wearing the hijab, wearing the headscarf, I'm visibly Muslim, and my identity is very clear and can be easily spotted. I've been living in this country for many, many years, and I've never experienced any kind of discrimination until after the 2016 election, when I had this one bad incident. I live in Silver Spring. I've always been living in Silver Spring for the last 14 years. And then one day I was coming out of the underground metro at 8 p.m. It was not too late or anything like that. And there was this middle-aged white man who just saw me getting something out of my purse. And he came towards me and said, "Are you getting a gun out of your purse? What are you doing, getting a gun?" And I just, put a very straight face, neutral face, as if I don't understand the word of English. And I just went by, and tried to ignore him completely. But the incident really had this kind of deep, profound effect on me. And of course, it's just one example among many. There are so many Muslim, members of the Muslim community, especially women wearing the hijab who are visibly Muslim, who face different types of discrimination day in and day out. And unfortunately, as I said in my presentation, it escalated after the 2016 election and during the Trump presidency. So that also kind of triggered a line of research focusing on Islamophobia and countering Islamophobia using a variety of tools, including social media and new media. That has been something I have been writing on and will continue to write on for some time to come.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's very enlightening and disturbing, but it's also interesting to see how these things impacted you. So one of the things you talked about kind of the golden triangle of research, activism, and media. And in those, I mean, you're a communications scholar, so you know about audience, and obviously those are different audiences. And so I'm wondering how you manage your communication and relationship to and kind of focus on or engagement with these different audiences, and how you kind of move your research to the public sphere. I'd be interested in hearing you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to start by saying that, a lot of these efforts are still at an embryonic stage in terms of, for example, even the work I mentioned, like, for example, Journal of Islamophobia Studies, right? Or the Conference of Islamophobia Studies. These are relatively new initiatives. They're important, they're significant, but they're still few and far between. We need to kind of have more work, more scholarship, more contributions, more visibility for this type of research. That's for sure. That's something that we can work towards, right? Having more centers of Islamic studies, Muslim studies, Arabic studies is great, but I would love to see more people from the region in many of these centers. I visited some of the, wonderful universities in the West, whether in the US or elsewhere, and sometimes I was horrified to find only one or two, literally, people from the Arab world or from the Middle East in these centers, right? And I always say it's important to create this kind of balance. We need the insider's knowledge and the outsider's gaze. Right? So the insider's knowledge being the people who are from the region, because they do have this kind of insider's knowledge and experience. They know the region in and out, and they're able to be the genuine voices talking about it. And at the same time, you have the outsider's gaze, because when you are not from the region, you have a different eye, a different way of looking at things, right? You can detect things that maybe I cannot detect, and I cannot just, see them, but you will see them as an outsider. So we need to create this kind of balance in many of these centers. And unfortunately, up till this moment, I would say this is not the case. Now, going to your question about the audiences, I believe that scholars should play the role of public intellectuals by creating a bridge, which is, by the way, the name of my program. So it's, I am really interested in this role of the bridge building. I believe it's very, very important. We create a bridge between our own scholarship, our own academic work, writing, publications, conferences, which is great. But you're only addressing an academic audience, as you rightly mentioned, Dean Bonnie. What about the rest of the world, right? What about the rest of society who also need to know about these issues? It's our role and our responsibility to try to reach beyond the borders and beyond the boundaries of just our own, laptops and libraries and books and publications, as fantastic as they are, but reach out to a much broader and much wider audience through public engagement, interfaith work, interfaith dialogue, media commentaries, media analysis, being public speakers. This is a very, very important role, in my opinion, and creating this bridge of being public intellectuals really serves the public good, right? That's one of the goals of our Department of Communication here at the University of Maryland, is promoting and serving the public good. So I believe the more that we can do that, the better, of course. And that is something I'm trying to contribute to the best of my ability. And I hope to be able to continue to address all of these issues and all of these different audiences for years to come, inshallah, which means God willing.
Yes, yes. Well, so we train in the academy, we train our students, our graduate students, to talk to academic audiences. So how do you, maybe this is something you do in your teaching, or maybe it's something, how do you train people to build those bridges from their work to these other audiences? What are some of the kinds of things that you think people need to know and do?
I think that we really need to have new courses, such as, for example, a course on media literacy. I was telling my students yesterday in my graduate seminar, it's called Introduction to Cultural Studies. It's a new seminar I introduced this semester, and I was talking to them about the need for teaching media literacy, right? How can we become media literate? How can we address different audiences? How can we talk in a language that the lay people can understand and simplify our own language, so we don't use a lot of academic jargon that would be difficult for people beyond academia to grasp or to understand? These media literacy skills, in my opinion, are needed not just at the university level or the postgraduate level, but I would say from K to 12 as well. I see now kids as young as 2 and 3 years old, holding their own cell phones, and they are on their tablets all the time. They're not looking at their parents, and they're not hearing what you're telling them. They're completely, totally absorbed in their own cell phones, right? So let's ask ourselves, what impact would that have on education, on society, on socialization, on social relations, on the future of these people when they grow up, right? This is very important. So I would say media literacy is one important way to definitely address that. Of course, other forms of training, like, communication skills, public speaking skills, listening skills. I always say listening is the forgotten skill. We're all interested in, like, oh, how am I going to speak, right? Or what am I going to say? What about listening to others in a good way and being good listeners? I think that is something which is very important as well. So trying to really kind of boost these skills of good listening, good, talking, public speaking, media literacy is a collective effort that we all have to contribute to, right? The parents at home, the educators in schools and colleges and universities, the media experts and scholars. It takes a village. It's a collective effort.
So one of the things you talked about a number of you talked about e-Jihad, you talked about a number of successful campaigns in cyberspace. And I wanted to ask you, what makes them successful by your measure? What is a successful campaign?
Yes, that's a great question, because honestly, a lot of the campaigns now use what we call the hashtags, right? So this hashtag is like, you really have to put it in very few words. Like, can you hear us now? Or say her name, right? Or Black Lives Matter, or Me Too. And it has to be something that resonates with the audience. So the audience has to kind of connect with this particular hashtag and find it to be important, to be meaningful for them. And people now have a very short attention span, right? So I remember as a kid, holding the book and reading the book, right? My son will say, text me in 3 words. I'm like, text you in 3 words? What do you mean? So what am I going to say? Hi, how are you? I need to communicate. So the new generation has a very, very short attention span. We have to pay attention to that also as educators, right? What does that tell us about the future of education, the future of new generations? So these campaigns depend on these very catchy hashtags, some of which I used in my own presentation, to attract or catch the attention of their own audiences. And then there is this process of snowballing. So snowballing means you have the ripple effect. So I'm going to start the campaign that says, hashtag Muslims report stuff, right? And I'm going to start with something really funny and witty. And then somebody else is going to join, and then somebody else is going to join. And before you know it, it starts to snowball and to create this kind of snowballing ripple effect. And that makes it much more effective and much more attractive, especially for the new generation of young people who are the main or the prime users of social media. So I think choosing the good topic, the topic has to be timely, important, and meaningful, choosing the right hashtag, addressing the right audience, using the right kind of appeals and framing of your own message and topic are all very important methods. And of course, the channel or the tool that you are using as well. So as I said in the presentation, for example, when you see hashtag Muslim rage, you think, oh my God, these people are so angry. It's like rage, right? And then you see, for example, it's very funny and you're using jokes. Jokes here have been very, very effective in these campaigns because, again, when you're talking about sensitive and difficult topics, racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, sexism, these are difficult topics to address. They're not easy topics. So when you're using humor, you're witty, you're funny, you're smart, you're brilliant, and you are humorous, that really makes it fly, and people are attracted to it, and it goes viral on social media in a very short time and makes it a very effective campaign. So I think these campaigns that have been successful have used the combination of all of these factors together.
Great. I'm going to ask you one more question before we go to the chat. Is that okay, Patrick? I see questions coming in and I want to give people plenty of time, but I wanted you to talk a little bit about your teaching. I know you're aware of the onboarding program, Terrapin Strong, the challenges students and faculty to think deeply about identity. And you've already talked about how identity has helped you frame much of your research and scholarship and public engagement. And I'm wondering how that comes to bear in your classroom, and what are some of the things that you're doing around identity and specifically around Islamophobia.
Yes, I think I introduced a number of new courses in the curriculum at the University of Maryland, like, for example, my course on Arab media, the courses on, Islam in cyberspace, Islamic discourses in cyberspace, intercultural communication and international dialogue, introduction to cultural studies, gender, media, and culture, also at the graduate level. So I try my best to introduce these new courses, whether at the undergraduate level or at the graduate level, to try to expose the students to different types of content and different types of ideas that maybe they will not have a chance to be exposed to. And I've had this kind of comment from a number of my students saying, thank you for talking about this issue. I was not aware of this, or I did not know that this existed. I did not know about that. So, I believe this is very important that we as faculty members continue to contribute to curriculum development by introducing new courses and new seminars that address all of these different issues. Also, managing the environment in the classroom itself. The classroom environment is very important, especially if you are touching upon difficult issues and difficult conversations like race, racism, right? Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Say Her Name, Islamophobia, right? Talking about, the experience, for example, I just shared with you. It's not an easy thing. It's a difficult thing, right? Even when I'm talking about it, I feel like, it is a hard thing to talk about, but I deliberately want to bring it up because it's important for us to make ourselves uncomfortable sometimes, right? But then to be able to manage this in the classroom by creating a safe space where everyone feels like, he or she or they can share their views, their ideas safely without being profiled, without being attacked, without being, shamed, without being named. I believe this is very important as well. As instructors, we have to provide this kind of safe space in our classroom to allow our students, whether they're undergraduates or graduates, to have this kind of safe space for self-expression, right? As long as they don't offend anyone, they should be able to talk and express their views. It's our role to give them this safe space to do so. So these are some of the things I try to very, very keen and very careful to include in my own teaching and in my own classroom environment in my 14, almost 15 years in Maryland.
Yes, I noticed almost 15. I was torn between 14. So how do you create it? What do you do to create a safe space in your classroom?
I allow all my students to express their views, even if I don't agree with them. So I've had this, nice complimentary note from one of my students saying, my professor, it was like, thank the professor week, when you get these nice cards, they really make my day. And, the note said, thank you for creating a safe space in the classroom that makes me want to come to class every day. And I was like, oh, this is really awesome. Thank you so much. I don't try to, show that I'm like, oh my God, create some kind of intimidating environment or somehow show the person talking that I don't agree with them or, what are you saying? I just leave them to say whatever they want. But if they say something which I don't agree with at all and can be distorting, then I have to interfere and turn it into an educational moment. For example, in one class, I was asking students, what do you think are some of the root causes of Islamophobia? And one student, to my shock, stood up and said, Christianity. And I said, excuse me? That Christianity is the cause of Islamophobia. So I tried to use this as an educational moment. I said, wait, Christianity is a great religion, right? Just like Judaism, just like Islam are great religions. You think it is okay for us to attach something as negative as Islamophobia to Christianity as a faith, as a religion, right? Wouldn't that be as bad as, for example, tying terrorism or extremism to Islam, right? We have to try to really kind of dismantle these issues and overcome these types of negative and unhealthy generalizations and misperceptions and misconceptions, right? And the student went on to say, but what about the Crusades? I said, do you think the Crusades represent Christianity, right? You think, for example, a group like KKK represents Christianity? Of course not. So just like we're talking about Islamophobia and trying to fight, seeing a group like Al-Qaeda or ISIS as, oh my God, they represent the 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide, right? We also have to be very careful not to profile other religions in a negative way. So I turned it into, an educational moment for the rest of the class to kind of get the idea, and they got the idea, and the student, accepted the argument at the end of the day and was not offended. So I believe it's important for us to capture these, difficult moments, controversial moments sometimes in the classroom and turn them into educational moments.
Thank you. So Patrick, I see there are a lot of questions, so let me turn it to you to.
Sure. Well, maybe we can keep on the educational track just for a moment. Someone's asked if you could comment a little bit about the role of media literacy, especially in the kind of K through 12 sphere in combating Islamophobia, and then also thinking about who could do that teaching, or is everybody well equipped to do that teaching?
Yeah, I think we need to train the trainers, so to speak. So just yesterday, I was given a talk to a K to 12, actually, teachers in Montgomery County Public Schools. It was a virtual talk. I was not there in person to enjoy the delicious dinner, unfortunately, but I gave the virtual talk and I told them, your role as K to 12 teachers is not less important than my role being a university professor. Maybe it is even more important because you are the ones who put the foundations. You can never build a building from the 10th floor. You have to start from the first floor up, right? So if they cannot put the right foundation, then the outcome is going to be a weak building that can fall at any moment. We have to have the strong foundation. So speaking of media literacy, we have to train the teachers themselves, right? What is media literacy? How can we define it? How can we understand it? What are the skills needed in order for us to be able, right, to kind of really create this kind of media literacy? Because as I said, we have to face the reality, right? We are parents, educators, teachers, professors, sisters, brothers, you name it. And we are dealing with this reality of young people being totally absorbed in social media, many times for harmful reasons or harmful purposes. Short attention span, they cannot pay attention for a long time. They might get misinformation and disinformation, including Islamophobic thoughts, or, in some worst cases, even, God forbid, human trafficking, violence, pornography, recruitment by some, gangs or terrorist groups. All of that exists in cyberspace, and we have to be aware of these dangers and kind of really create a new curriculum that really teaches these media literacy skills. We have to teach and train the teachers who then will be able to train and teach their own students. So I see it as an interrelated, interconnected phenomena, but I would love for us to really start this effort from K to 12, and of course, at the university level and beyond.
Thank you. And I wanted to invite Fatima Kashavaris from the School of Language, Literature, and Culture. She said she's got a question to ask. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Sahar, wonderful. Thank you so much. You know, when you are from the Muslim community and you're still learning a lot about the bias and countering it, that means you really covered a vast territory very effectively. I was wondering if, you know, as you know very well, if you wearing the hijab, or if you are in a situation where you're explicitly, clearly attached to a Muslim community, things are much more direct, black and white, so to speak. I wonder if anyone does any studies about implicit biases, because there was a study of applications to jobs for people who had names who sounded like African-American names, and names that were like just general, you know, name of the Western general white names. And the same set of applications were sent to the two different groups, one with that name and one with that name, and a result was very different. I wonder if anyone does study implicit bias, where, you know, Muslims are competing for situations, or if, you know, they're just are being judged, being evaluated, and how does that, the result of that is happening. If there are any studies of that, I'd really love to know about. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Fatima. This is an excellent point. Thank you. I think that there is now a growing body of literature, as I said, on Islamophobia studies, and some of it is looking at this, you know, particular aspect of the implicit bias. I cannot recall the exact titles, but I'll definitely look up for some of them, look them up for you and share them with you. I'd be happy to do so. But I'm really happy that you raised this point, because when people apply for jobs, right, there are all of these considerations, like, you know, gender, race, ethnicity, you know, if a woman is wearing the hijab. I've had this one incident, I'll never forget it, of a young lady who emailed me and said, you know, I noticed that you are a professor who wears the hijab and you are working at a Western university. I want to ask your advice or seek your advice, because I'm wearing the hijab too, but I'm going to apply for some jobs in the West. And I really want to know, do you think it would be a good idea for me to take off my hijab for the interview process and then put it on after I get the job? And I said to her, listen, very simply put, if a certain place does not accept you as you are, it is not the right place for you, period. You know, you cannot do this kind of stuff, like, you know, just take it off now, put it on later. They have to accept who you are holistically, right? Who you are as a person, your ideas, your background, your religious beliefs, your values. You know, this is part and parcel of who you are. If you are not accepted there, then this is not the right place for you. So she took my advice, and I don't know what happened with the job, but she took my advice in terms of not taking off her hijab for the interview. So yes, of course, you know, the process of bias is many cases implicit rather than explicit. It happens in very subtle yet very painful ways. And we have to be aware of that, of course. And as I said, if I find some of these studies, I'll definitely share them with you. Thank you.
And there was a question in the chat about whether you think global events that are going to be organized in majority Muslim nations, like, for example, FIFA 2022 in Qatar, the International Soccer Football League, what kind of impact might that have on global understandings and stereotypes about Muslims?
Yes, there's a whole body of research now on this particular point, actually, like talking about this whole thing about sports diplomacy, right? And, you know, religious diplomacy, sports diplomacy, public diplomacy. So, for example, Qatar, as you said, the example of, you know, hosting the FIFA in, the event in 2022, that is something that definitely can attract a lot of quote unquote positive attention to, to the Arab world / Muslim world. So, I mean, organizing these types of global events, international events, are indeed very important in terms of trying to bring about visibility and to really show the world that, you know, these countries have modernization and they have civilization. I remember when I came to the US, 14 years ago or 15 years ago, like, my son told me, oh my God, my colleagues at school think that people ride a camel back in Egypt. And I said, yeah, tell them that you have your own camel pet. It's called Chemo, and you take it to school and you ride it, and just turn it into a joke, right? Just turn it into a joke, but don't feel offended. Just try to show them pictures of Egypt, show them pictures of Cairo, a very huge city, more than 18 million people live there, high-rise buildings, very modern, and at the same time has a very old and very ancient civilizations, right? So I'm trying to say here that, we need to kind of find the ways to communicate our own identity in a very positive way, and definitely sports diplomacy, global diplomacy, all of these important events are a very important way to do so.
And I guess as long as we're traveling around the world, another person asks that we've been seeing some examples of Syrians in the news expressing solidarity with Ukrainians during the current crisis because of the shared violence they have experienced from the Russian government. Are you seeing similar mobilization of support for Ukrainians on social media from Syrian populations?
There's been a lot of mobilization in terms of support for the Ukrainians throughout the world. I would just say that there has been a double standard really in Western media in terms of the coverage of the crisis in Ukraine. I mean, definitely our hearts are aching. I cannot even stand to look at some of the, the images and the footage coming out of Ukraine. But, some of the commentators, not all of course, but some of the commentators in Western media use terrible language. Like, for example, oh, these are middle class, white European, refugees. They're not like some of the other people. Oh, with all due respect, one of them said, with all due respect, but they're not like the others. And by the others, he means the people from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Iraq. This is very, very offensive, of course. And it's not just one commentator. It happened in more than one incident. And some people called it out. Some people mentioned that on social media and commented on it and said, we are wholeheartedly in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, but please be careful about this kind of discrimination, this kind of double standards in Western media that discriminates between one refugee and another. That is a very important thing. So again, how these issues are framed and how they're being presented in Western media and international media speaks volumes about some of the underlying biases, discriminations, issues of lack of equity, lack of social justice, Islamophobia. All of these things are pretty much embedded in some of these double standards we have witnessed recently in Western media. So this is a very important point to highlight.
Thank you so much. And in what I think is a first, at least that I've seen, we have someone joining us today, I think from Turkey, but they write that they are living in Syria, who noticed that it's not simply specific kinds of phobia, but a broader sense of what he calls otherness phobia. And they write in the chat that children are raised with a kind of particular hatred amongst one another, and that it's polarization that may be the problem. Can you comment what we might do about polarization?
Polarization and fragmentation have unfortunately grown a lot, during the Trump presidency. There's been no question about it. And we are still suffering from the aftermath of these types of divisiveness, fragmentation, and polarization to a very big extent, right? If you watch even the media, you watch CNN and you watch Fox News, and like you're watching two different, countries, two different continents, not two different channels in the same country. And we definitely have a role to play as educators, as parents, as supportive communities to try to bridge some of the gaps. Again, going back to the idea of bridge and bridging that I talked about earlier, I really love this idea of bridge building. Bridge some of these gaps and narrow some of these distances between different groups. Because at the end of the day, like I said at the very end of my presentation, we are all in this together. When people went out and they marched with the Muslim community and said, not in my name, we are marching against the Muslim travel ban. One of my sisters who never came to the United States said, as much as I was very offended by the policies of the Muslim travel ban, as much as I'm really grateful for these people who came out from all walks of life, different religions, different, races, ethnicities, they all came out in support of the Muslim community and marching with and for the Muslim community in solidarity. So she was really touched by that, and a lot of people were touched by that. So I think it's important for us to kind of really fight this kind of polarization, but actions always speak louder than words. So when we go out, when we march together, speak together, interfaith dialogue is very, very important. Something I've been investing a lot of time and effort in for many years has been building, and participating in interfaith dialogue with a lot of different groups, because, at the end of the day, when there is discrimination, when there is hatred, when there is xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, it impacts everyone. It affects everyone in a negative way. And to counter it and to fight it, we have to stand united, not divided.
Fantastic. I'm just going to ask one additional question, and maybe this is the pessimist in me. I'm sorry about this, but you've shown all these wonderful ways that people have resisted, and I'm wondering, is there research showing that the resistance has been impactful? Have the humorous hashtags changed people's minds?
Yeah, that's a very interesting and important question, because we have seen these campaigns go viral. We have seen many of them being successful in the sense that they attracted a huge following on social media. It's very important to take it to the next level, which is then the attitude change, right? And I would not say that I have seen the studies that linked these particular campaigns, although they've been very successful. They went viral online. They've really had a huge impact in terms of, raising the visibility and the awareness about all of these important issues. But I guess, what you're saying here, Professor Patrick, is that like taking it to the next level and doing some kind of follow-up study to find out what kind of impact it actually had in terms of changing the actual, right, attitudes of people towards these particular issues. Now, again, I'm going to look for some of these particular studies. If I find any, I'm definitely going to be happy to share them with you. But let me just say quickly that there is one also interesting campaign, very important one, that I did not have time to mention during my presentation. It is called #HandsOffMyHijab. And that's a campaign that was started in France. So France in particular has a certain form of Islamophobia, which is very, very, I would say, detrimental to the freedom of expression and freedom of religion. So it had always this type of French secularism that somehow does not tolerate any form of religious difference or diversity. So there have been campaigns there against the hijab, the Muslim headscarf, and against the niqab, which is the face veil, the Muslim face veil. And some Muslim women responded with this #HandsOffMyHijab to say, as the name implies, or as the hashtag implies, do not touch my hijab, because that's something I've chosen personally with my own free will. And that's a common, thing which is very misunderstood, I think, in the West. People think that, oh, every Muslim woman has been forced to wear the hijab, right? In many cases, that is not the case, right? It can be her own personal choice. And in some cases, she can even resist certain social forces in order to put on the hijab, which I consider to be an act of liberation and an act of resistance rather than an act of oppression. So we need to revisit and re-understand all of these issues again and unpack the complexities and nuances of all of these issues to really kind of dismantle these, negative structures of social injustice and lack of equity, including Islamophobia.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all that you've done for us. It's really been interesting. Dean Thornton-Dill, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we close?
Dean Bonnie, I think you're muted.
Looks like you said.
I know my screen went away somewhere. I couldn't find the mute button, but here I am. I just want to really, all I was going to say was thank you very much. This has been very informative, very thought-provoking, and I think a lot for all of us to hear and learn. And so we really appreciate you on our faculty, with our students, and among us, and appreciate your sharing today.
Thank you so much, Dean Bonnie. Again, really our fearless leader. Thank you so much for putting together this very, very important colloquium series. And thanks to all the staff who worked with you, Professor Patrick, Ashley, everyone else who helped to put together this series. And thanks to every and each one of you who took time out of your busy schedules to be here today and to participate and ask questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.